A humble young woman helped a stranger who had been violently mugged, without knowing he was a millionaire and what he did next for her. Laura woke up before dawn, as usual, in the tiny apartment she shared with her mother, Carmen, in the modest neighborhood of San Rafael. The faint morning light crept through the worn curtains, heralding another day of struggle. Carmen rested in bed, her ragged breathing revealing the heart problems that afflicted her. Laura had always been her pillar, caring for her devotedly despite the hardships. After preparing a simple breakfast, Laura kissed her mother on the forehead before heading out to El Encanto, the grocery store where she worked as a cashier and stock clerk. The commute to work was short, but always filled with noise and movement, typical of the bustling neighborhood. Upon arriving, she was greeted by Mr. Thomas, the store owner, whose authoritarian presence commanded respect and sometimes fear. "Good morning, Laura. Don't be late today," Mr. Thomas said with a stern look as he inspected the inventory. Laura nodded, hiding her fatigue behind a strained smile. She knew each day would be the same as the last. Long hours dealing with demanding customers, restocking shelves, and facing Mr. Thomas's constant demands. Although she loved her job, she couldn't help feeling exploited by the working conditions and lack of recognition. Amid the daily routine, Laura found solace in her friendship with Paula, a co-worker who shared her dreams of a better future. Paula often spoke excitedly about her idea to open a small organic product store, imagining the day they could escape the monotony of El Encanto and build something of their own. One afternoon, as they took a break together in the store's small rest area, Laura confessed her worries. "I don't know how I'm going to pay for Mum's treatment. The expenses keep piling up and my salary barely covers anything," she said, looking down sadly. Paula comforted her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find a way, Laura. You're not alone in this." The financial pressure on Laura was immense. Carmen needed expensive medications and frequent medical checkups, forcing Laura to work extra hours, often without fair compensation. The burden was overwhelming, and though she tried to remain hopeful, the fear of not being able to support her mother weighed on her constantly. In addition to her work and family responsibilities, Laura wrestled with Samuel's feelings, her childhood neighbor. Samuel had shown a romantic interest in her for years, always ready to offer help and companionship. However, Laura didn't fully reciprocate his feelings. Her heart was occupied by another concern, her mother's well-being. Despite Samuel's kindness and constant presence, he couldn't understand why Laura kept an emotional distance. Every gesture of affection from him seemed to remind Laura of the limitations of her own life, where her priorities were clearly defined by the need to care for Carmen. One afternoon, after a long day at the store, Laura returned home feeling especially exhausted. Carmen greeted her with a weak smile and a hug, attempting to hide her pain. But reality quickly set in when Carmen explained that she needed an even more expensive treatment than they had anticipated. "It's urgent, Laura. The new medication is vital for her health," Carmen said in a trembling voice. Laura felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. Bills, medical costs, and uncertainty flooded her mind, leaving a sense of despair. She looked at her mother, hoping to find a solution in her weary eyes. "I don't know how I'm going to get the necessary money," she murmured, feeling a pang of anguish. In that moment, Laura wondered if her job at El Encanto would be enough to cover the new expenses. The reality of her financial constraints became even clearer, and the uncertainty about the future shrouded her in worry. How could she face this challenge when it seemed each day brought new obstacles? As night fell over San Rafael, Laura prepared for another day of work, knowing she would have to find a way to cope with the mounting pressure. The lights of El Encanto shone brightly in the darkness, reflecting a life filled with dreams and struggles, where a humble young woman tried to keep hope alive in spite of adversity. Uncertainty loomed over her, leaving the reader to wonder how Laura would manage to cover her mother's treatment and whether her job at the store would suffice to meet the costs. The days at El Encanto went by with a monotony that sometimes weighed on Laura's shoulders. Each morning she arrived at the store early, ready to face another workday. However, that particular day felt especially draining. The hours passed one after another, and the fatigue showed in her eyes. Even so, Laura maintained a forced smile, serving every customer with her usual kindness. Mr. Thomas, the store owner, had changed over the past few weeks. His attitude grew increasingly authoritarian and demanding. Not only did he ask Laura to work overtime without fair pay, but he also kept a close eye on her, questioning every minor mistake. "We can't afford to lose control of our inventory, Laura. I need you to stay late tonight," he demanded one afternoon, frowning at the numbers. Laura sighed, knowing she had no choice but to comply. The financial responsibilities on her were crushing. Her salary barely covered Carmen's medical bills, and every extra hour meant sacrificing a bit more of her already limited energy. Despite the pressure, she tried to stay calm, recalling Paula's words. "It will all pass, Laura. We just have to keep going." That afternoon, the atmosphere in the store was more tense than usual. The customers seemed more impatient, and Mr. Thomas kept repeating his demands. Laura served each purchase efficiently, but her mind was elsewhere, worried about how she would pay for her mother's next treatment. Paula, ever attentive, tried to encourage her with words of support, but Laura couldn't help feeling trapped in a spiral of stress and exhaustion. Finally, the clock signaled closing time. Relieved yet worn out, Laura said goodbye to Paula and stepped outside. The sky, already dark, unleashed a heavy downpour that seemed to mirror her mood. Without an umbrella and wearing only a thin coat, Laura set off toward home, seeking shelter in the shadows of the night. As she walked through the deserted streets of San Rafael, the rain poured down, soaking her quickly. The streetlights barely lit the way, creating a gloomy, silent scene. That was when she heard hurried footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw a man running, clearly agitated and nervous. Suddenly, two figures emerged from the darkness, moving toward the man with violent intentions. Without thinking, Laura felt a surge of fear and compassion. The man stumbled, falling to the ground as the attackers threatened him with blows. Laura knew intervening could put her in danger, but she couldn't stand by and do nothing. "Hey, leave him alone!" she shouted, not considering the consequences. The assailants turned to her, their expressions filled with anger and surprise. One of them raised his fist, aiming right at Laura. "What's it to you, girl?" he snapped in a harsh voice, stepping toward her. Laura's heart pounded, but she didn't back down. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and dialed emergency services. "Help! There's a mugging in progress on the street near the Central Park." While she spoke to the police, she remained beside the injured man. Realizing the authorities were on their way, the attackers fled quickly, vanishing into the shadows of the night. Laura exhaled in relief, though adrenaline still coursed through her veins. The ambulance arrived shortly afterward, and the paramedics attended to the man. Laura watched them work to stabilize him, their swift professional movements a stark contrast to the chaos of the scene. Despite his confusion and pain, the man managed a faint smile and murmured a few words of thanks before being taken to the hospital. Soaked and shaking, Laura cast one last look at the spot where the assault had taken place. The rain kept falling, washing away the footprints of the incident, but leaving an indelible mark on her memory. Heart still racing, she resumed her walk home, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she moved through the wet streets, Laura couldn't help wondering who that man was and why he'd been attacked so brutally. The uncertainty about his identity and the motive behind the assault gnawed at her. Could he be someone she knew, or just a stranger in distress? Her mind filled with unanswered questions, and she began to worry about the repercussions of her actions. By the time she arrived home, the rain had eased, leaving the air calmer, though her mind was anything but. Carmen greeted her with a concerned gaze, immediately noticing her disheveled state. Laura tried to reassure her, though her own spirit was far from calm. That night, as she settled into bed, Laura's thoughts wouldn't stop. Meeting that man had left a deep impression, and not knowing who he was or how they might meet again weighed heavily on her. In the distance, the lights of El Encanto flickered, reminding her of the responsibilities she still had to face. Laura's story had taken an unexpected turn, leaving the reader intrigued by how this incident would shape her life and the fate of both protagonists. Sometime later, Jacob lay in the sterile hospital room, staring at the white ceiling with a mix of confusion and pain. His injuries from the assault still needed time to heal, and each breath reminded him of life's fragility. At his side was Logan, his lifelong friend and trusted lawyer, who was reviewing some documents with a serious expression. "Jacob, you need to focus on business now more than ever," Logan advised, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The Japanese investors are waiting, and we can't afford any delays. Your distraction is costing you too much." Jacob nodded weakly, though deep down he knew Logan was right. Still, his mind couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had saved him. The image of Laura helping him, her bravery in the rain, remained etched in his memory. In the next room, Sean, Jacob's brother, watched with growing impatience. "What's going on, Jacob? We can't keep waiting. The investors won't wait forever," he admonished, frustration dripping from his tone. The tension between the brothers was palpable. Sean had always been the pragmatic one, while Jacob, more of a dreamer, sometimes veered from the family's goals. "I'm trying to manage everything, Sean," Jacob responded, fighting to remain calm despite the pain. "I just need a little more time." Sean sighed, throwing up his hands in exasperation. "There's no time for your distractions, brother. Sign the contract and secure the company's future. We can't afford to fail now." Jacob looked out the window, watching the gentle rain. He knew he had to find a way to balance his corporate responsibilities with the personal drive he felt to learn more about the woman who had helped him. His heart pushed him forward, though his mind told him to prioritize business. Determined not to miss the chance to find Laura, Jacob began to investigate. He recalled the receipt he'd noticed at El Encanto and realized it was the clue he needed. With Logan's help, he gained access to the store's records. Laura's name was listed, along with other details, address, phone number, and information about her usual purchases. That same afternoon, Jacob dressed in casual clothes and headed to the modest neighborhood where Laura worked. Upon arrival, he noted the contrast between his world and hers. The streets were narrow and full of life, with small shops and humble homes that seemed to fight daily adversity. The bustle of the local market contrasted sharply with the sophisticated calm of his usual corporate settings. He entered El Encanto, looking inconspicuous, trying not to stand out. Mr. Thomas, the owner, eyed him suspiciously while checking the shelves. Jacob recognized Laura immediately. She greeted him with a smile, unaware of the true identity of her visitor. "Hi, Laura," Jacob said, trying to sound natural. "It's been a while since I last saw you." Laura looked up and recognized him at once. "Jacob, I'm glad to see you're okay. How have you been?" "I'm fine, thanks. I just wanted to stop by and say hello," he replied, avoiding the real reason for his visit. Deep down, though, his heart was pounding, hungry for answers. As they chatted, Mr. Thomas watched closely, noticing the instant connection between them. His calculating mind was already envisioning possible benefits of a new, influential customer, though something about the exchange left him uneasy. Jacob bought a few items, making sure to leave a small tip in the register as a gesture of gratitude. Before leaving, he exchanged a few more words with Laura, who seemed genuinely happy to see him. "Take care, Jacob. We hadn't seen you for days," she remarked, suspecting nothing. "Thanks, Laura. You take care too," he responded, smiling in a way that concealed his true intentions. Stepping outside, Jacob paused for a moment to observe Laura's face. There was a strength and a tenderness in her that captivated him. Still, he knew he couldn't reveal his true status yet. He needed to learn more about her before taking the next step. As he walked away, Laura watched him leave, intrigued by Jacob's kindness, and the inexplicably familiar feeling he gave off. She couldn't help the growing curiosity about the man who, unbeknownst to her, had been her savior in the darkness. Mr. Thomas, noticing Jacob's departure, frowned. Something in Jacob's demeanor seemed off, though he couldn't put his finger on it. He chose to say nothing for the moment, focusing instead on maintaining efficiency in the store. On her way home, Laura reflected on her encounter with Jacob. There was something about him that moved her deeply, though she couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. Her thoughts drifted back to that rainy night, wondering if she could recall more details to help understand who he really was. Meanwhile, Jacob pored over El Encanto's records again, looking for any additional clue that might lead him closer to Laura. His determination grew, driven by a mix of gratitude and curiosity. He sensed his life was about to change in ways he'd never imagined. Night fell over San Rafael, draping the neighborhood in a deceptive calm. Unaware of it, Laura had left a mark on Jacob's life, and he, in turn, was set on learning more about the young woman who had saved him. Fate was already weaving its threads, connecting two worlds that seemed vastly different, but would soon discover they had more in common than they ever could have imagined. The lives of Laura and Jacob seemed to lie at opposite ends of the same universe. While Laura rose each morning burdened by responsibilities, preparing breakfast for her mother and heading to El Encanto with a quiet determination, Jacob was busy attending meetings in skyscrapers and overseeing high-level corporate projects. His days were filled with strategic decisions, negotiations with international investors, and exclusive social events. The difference in their surroundings and daily routines was evident, underscoring the gap between their worlds. In the modest neighborhood of San Rafael, Laura struggled to balance her job and caring for Carmen. Long shifts at the store left her exhausted, yet she never lost hope of finding a way to fund her mother's medical treatments. Every peso she earned was crucial, and every sacrifice she made had a clear purpose. Her life, though full of challenges, was marked by resilience and filial devotion. Meanwhile, Jacob enjoyed the comforts his professional success afforded him. His apartment was decorated with designer furniture and offered panoramic views of the city. High-level meetings and innovative projects filled his calendar, but despite his apparent satisfaction, an underlying sense of emptiness trailed him. Meeting Laura had sparked in him a curiosity and gratitude that his material achievements could not fulfill. Paula, Laura's friend and co-worker, dreamed of starting her own business. She observed Jacob with admiration during his visits to El Encanto. She saw in him a possible connection that could propel her dream forward, though she didn't know how to approach him without seeming self-serving. Paula was ambitious and creative, always hatching plans and strategies for her future organic products shop. Yet her shyness and fear of rejection held her back, keeping her in the role of a passive observer. One day, Jacob decided to return to El Encanto. Casually yet impeccably dressed, he entered the store with a friendly expression. Laura, upon seeing him, felt a mix of surprise and relief. "Hello, Laura," he greeted her with a warm smile. "It's been a while since I've seen you." "Jacob, I'm so glad to see you doing well. How are you?" she replied, genuinely happy to see him safe and sound. As they spoke, the conversation took a more personal turn. Without thinking, Laura mentioned her mother's health problems. "My mom needs a more expensive treatment than we had planned. I'm trying to figure out how to pay for it," she confessed, letting her words out with disarming honesty. Jacob listened intently, feeling a pang in his heart. He knew he could help, but he didn't want to force his assistance on her. "I'm really sorry, Laura. If there's anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to let me know," he offered sincerely, still not revealing his true identity or financial resources. Laura, unaware of the extent of Jacob's means, thanked him with a shy smile. "Thank you, Jacob. I really appreciate your kindness." Meanwhile, Samuel watched from a corner of the store. He'd noticed Laura's growing interest in Jacob and couldn't help feeling jealous. Samuel had been in love with Laura for years and was always ready to support her, yet he sensed his feelings weren't returned in the same way. Each time Laura spoke about Jacob, Samuel felt a stab of insecurity, questioning his own worth and place in her life. In parallel, Jacob's brother Sean was starting to suspect his siblings' activities. His focus was split between business matters and the growing concern over Jacob's distraction. As he reviewed company records, Sean noticed Jacob was spending time in the humble neighborhood, something that didn't align with his image of a driven, goal-oriented businessman. What is Jacob doing in San Rafael? This doesn't make sense, he thought, frustration creeping in. Tension between the brothers grew more palpable when Sean confronted Jacob at a family meeting. "Jacob, I don't understand why you're losing focus. We need to sign the contract with the Japanese investors as soon as possible. We can't afford any more distractions," he rebuked, voice brimming with urgency. Jacob tried to stay calm, but the inner pressure was consuming him. He knew he had to focus on business to secure the family company's future. Yet something about his encounter with Laura had made him rethink his priorities. The kindness and strength he'd seen in her offered him a fresh perspective on what truly mattered in life. Back at El Encanto, Paula kept an eye on Laura and Jacob's interactions with growing interest. She saw an opportunity in Jacob that might be the push she needed for her own business plans. Yet uncertainty about how to approach him without seeming opportunistic kept her in constant doubt. Paula wanted to help her friend while also pursuing her own goals, but striking a balance between the two seemed elusive. Amid these rising tensions, Jacob and Laura agreed to meet outside of work for coffee and a chance to talk more freely. This meeting promised to be a turning point in their lives, an opportunity to deepen their connection and explore the possibilities now open to them. When they parted that day, both felt a blend of anticipation and nervousness. Although intrigued by Jacob, Laura remained focused on her responsibilities and her mother's well-being. Jacob, on the other hand, saw in Laura a source of inspiration and a possible answer to the questions that had plagued him ever since that stormy night. Evening fell over San Rafael, and the lights of El Encanto shone brightly, symbolizing the hope and dreams both Laura and Paula shared. The promise of meeting outside their work environment left them both feeling expectant, wondering what the future held in store. The sun was setting over San Rafael, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jacob and Laura met at a small cafe in the area, a cozy spot with wooden tables and warm lights that created an intimate atmosphere. It was a simple place, far from the bustle of El Encanto, perfect for a more relaxed conversation. They sat facing each other, each with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The conversation flowed naturally, filling the silences with laughter and shared confidences. Laura spoke about her daily routine, the challenges of caring for Carmen, and her dreams of studying something beyond her current work at the store. In turn, Jacob shared anecdotes about his family business, steering clear of too many details about his exact role in the company. He mentioned ongoing projects and the importance of finding balance between personal and professional life. "I've always admired people like you, who fight day by day for their dreams," Jacob said, watching Laura with genuine admiration. She smiled, grateful for his words, still unaware of the extent of Jacob's influence. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the neighborhood, Paula watched Jacob and Laura from afar. Her curiosity about Jacob had grown since his first visit to El Encanto. Paula saw him as a potential connection that could help her finance her own venture, an organic product store she'd been planning for months. However, she feared that prying too much into Jacob's affairs might jeopardize her friendship with Laura. She decided to keep her questions to herself, though her mind couldn't stop imagining ways to approach him without seeming greedy. Back at the store, Mr. Thomas noticed Laura returning late from her break, something unusual in her strict routine. His expression hardened when she came in, and he decided to confront her. "Laura, you've been coming back late lately. If this continues, I'll have to consider disciplinary measures," he warned, his eyes filled with mistrust. Laura, visibly tired, tried to explain that she'd stayed a bit longer to attend to some customers, But Mr. Thomas seemed unconvinced. The pressure on her mounted, adding more stress to her already overwhelming burden. Meanwhile, touched by Laura's honesty about her mother's condition, Jacob began thinking about how he could help, without revealing his true identity and status. He thought of his contacts and the smaller companies within his network that could offer better working conditions. The idea of finding her a better paid job took shape in his mind, though he still didn't know how to suggest it without arousing suspicion. As for Laura, she enjoyed her time with Jacob, grateful for his company and support, never imagining the genuine intention behind his gestures went far beyond what was visible. Their friendship grew stronger with every meeting, easing some of Laura's daily worries, though uncertainty about the future still loomed over her. In Jacob's office, Sean reviewed reports and charts with mounting frustration. He had noticed his brother spending more time than usual on activities seemingly unrelated to running the family business. "This makes no sense, Jacob," he muttered, his impatience rising. The thought that Jacob might be losing focus on the family enterprise infuriated him. He decided it was time to intervene, regardless of the consequences, to ensure the company didn't veer off course before finalizing the deal with the awaiting Japanese investors. The next day, the fluorescent lights at El Encanto flickered intermittently as Laura organized the inventory at the end of her shift. Though her hands were accustomed to the repetitive tasks, she sensed something was off. There were discrepancies in the accounts, missing products and records that didn't match the actual sales. Her heart pounded upon realizing something wasn't right. "What's going on, Laura?" asked Mr. Thomas, his voice heavy with suspicion as he approached her. His eyes, normally stern, now showed a mix of anger and worry. Laura tried to remain calm, but the pressure was overwhelming. "I don't know, Mr. Thomas. Everything seems to be in order, but there are some differences I can't explain." Mr. Thomas frowned, gripping the edge of the counter. "I don't want this getting out. Keep quiet and don't make any more mistakes. If this continues, we'll have serious problems." Laura nodded, feeling the weight of his threat. She knew reporting these irregularities could put her at risk, yet she also understood the importance of honesty. Still, the fear of losing her job and the financial stability that El Encanto provided kept her in a moral dilemma. Meanwhile, Paula watched Laura with growing concern. Working conditions in the store were becoming unbearable, and Mr. Thomas's constant pressure was draining them both physically and emotionally. One afternoon, after a particularly rough shift, Paula decided she could no longer endure the exploitation. "Laura, I've been thinking a lot lately," Paula began, her eyes reflecting determination. "We can't keep going like this. We need to find another path, one that lets us take control of our own futures." Laura sighed, understanding her friend's frustration. "I know, Paula, but it's not easy to find something better when we barely have enough to get by." Paula squeezed Laura's hand. "Together, we can do it. We don't deserve to be stuck in these conditions. It's time to take charge of our lives." Resolute, Paula began researching opportunities and resources to start her own business. Her entrepreneurial spirit and creativity flared, finding motivation in adversity to change their destiny. Though worried about the uncertainty, Laura supported Paula at every turn, valuing her friendship and the hope she embodied. In Jacob's office, Logan studied the financial reports closely. His expression grew grim as he found signs of corruption within the company. "Sean is pulling strings to speed up signing with the Japanese investors, but he's using questionable terms that could damage our reputation," Logan informed a pensive Jacob, who was already unsure how to handle the situation. "We need to act fast," Jacob answered, concern evident. Still, his mind wasn't fully on business. His constant thoughts of Laura and his desire to help her left him distracted and vulnerable to Sean's schemes. Sean, for his part, watched his brother's actions with growing impatience. Aware that Jacob was losing focus, he chose to intervene. "Jacob, we can't let personal matters sidetrack you. Sign the contract now and secure the company's future," he demanded, his tone unyielding. Jacob tried to keep calm, but the pressure overwhelmed him. "I'm doing the best I can, Sean. We just need a bit more time to make sure everything goes smoothly." Sean shook his head in frustration. "There's no time for more delays. The investors are getting impatient and won't tolerate further excuses. Sign or face the consequences." Meanwhile, Laura decided to take the next step in her search for a better job opportunity. She had received an unexpected work offer from an unknown company, and while it was tempting, she hesitated to leave her mother and her roots behind. Torn, she chose to attend the interview, hoping to find a solution to her problems without compromising her commitment to Carmen. The interview took place in an elegant office, where a kind manager greeted Laura and explained the position's responsibilities and benefits in detail. The salary offer was significantly higher, and the opportunities for growth were obvious, something Laura had longed for. Yet the dilemma of leaving her mother and the life she knew weighed heavily on her. That same afternoon, Samuel could no longer hold back his feelings and decided to confront Laura. He found her at the local market, where they occasionally bumped into each other. "Laura, we need to talk," said Samuel, his voice charged with worry and hope. "I don't understand why you're pulling away from me. I feel like I'm losing you." Laura, overwhelmed by all the tensions she was facing, took a moment before responding. "Samuel, it's not that I don't care about you, but right now I have other priorities. My mother is very sick, and I need to focus on that." Samuel felt a pang of hurt, but tried to hide it. "I understand, but I want you to know I'll always be here for you. You don't have to handle everything on your own." Laura looked at him sadly. "Thank you, Samuel. I appreciate it, truly. But I need time to deal with all of this." Her rejection created a tense atmosphere between them, and Samuel, though hurt, decided to respect the space Laura needed. Still, he couldn't avoid feeling more insecure and questioning his place in her life. Meanwhile, Carmen's health subtly declined. Her medical appointments and treatments became more frequent, intensifying the financial burden on Laura. The pressure to care for her mother and the possibility of a better job opportunity mingled, creating a storm of difficult decisions. Back home, Laura received a message on her phone. Opening it, she found a work proposal from the unknown company, detailing a potentially better life. Yet the source was unclear, leaving her with more questions than answers. Could this be the solution I was looking for, she wondered, feeling a mix of relief and skepticism. She saved the message, weighing her options and trying to find a way to balance her responsibilities without sacrificing her own well-being or her mother's. Meanwhile, in Jacob's office, tensions reached a boiling point. Sean was ready to put his plan into action, determined to remove Jacob from business operations at any cost. Using fabricated evidence and well-placed rumors, he aimed to discredit his brother in front of the investors and the board, endangering not only the company's stability, but also the lives of those who relied on Jacob. Night fell on a scene of Laura contemplating the job proposal, unaware that its source was Jacob, who was fighting his own brother's schemes to ensure she could overcome her difficulties. At the same time, Sean prepared to execute his plan, jeopardizing the family business's future and everyone involved. The atmosphere at El Encanto had grown tense since Laura discovered the irregularities in the inventory. That day, as she organized the products, her mind kept revisiting the discrepancies she'd noticed. Her heart pounded when Mr. Thomas approached, his eyes brimming with suspicion. "Laura, I need to talk to you in private," said Mr. Thomas, his tone combining authority and distrust. Laura nodded, trying to stay composed despite the fear gripping her. Once in the office, Mr. Thomas shut the door abruptly and fixed a hard gaze on her. "You know full well these inconsistencies can't continue. I'm starting to think someone here is stealing, and you have direct access to the register," he accused. It felt as though the ground were collapsing beneath Laura's feet. "No, Mr. Thomas, I don't know what you're talking about. I've checked everything multiple times." But Mr. Thomas wasn't convinced. "Don't lie to me, Laura. If you don't cooperate, I'll be forced to take drastic measures." Before she could respond, Mr. Thomas pulled out a copy of supposed evidence and tossed it onto the desk. "I regret to inform you that we're ending your contract, effective immediately." Shock overwhelmed Laura. She lost her job overnight at the very moment she needed it most to pay for her mother's treatments. Tears threatened to spill, but she forced herself to remain strong. "Mr. Thomas, this is unfair. I haven't done anything wrong. Do yourself a favor and stay out of trouble. Keep quiet about this," Mr. Thomas retorted before leaving the office, abandoning her there, devastated. That night, as she sat in the tiny apartment with Carmen, the news of her dismissal weighed on her like a heavy stone. Medical bills and treatment costs were mounting daily, and now, without her income, the situation seemed dire. Desperate, she recalled the job offer she'd received and resolved to seek an immediate solution. In the elegant mansion where he lived, Jacob reviewed financial reports with a troubled expression. Logan, his friend and trusted lawyer, stood beside him, pointing out irregularities suggesting Sean was manipulating the contract terms with the Japanese investors. "Jacob, Sean is speeding up the process to close the deal prematurely. The terms aren't favorable and could damage our reputation," Logan warned. Jacob nodded, his mind split between business concerns and growing worry for Laura. Carmen's worsening health and the recent incident had diverted his attention, leaving him exposed to his brother's machinations. Determined to help Laura, Jacob decided to intervene directly. He knew he had to proceed cautiously to avoid revealing too much about his resources. He quietly contacted a partner company that could offer her a better-paying job, hoping she would accept without suspecting the true source of the help. That same afternoon, Laura attended the interview at the unknown firm. The manager, a polite and professional man, offered her a position with a significantly higher salary and extra benefits. The opportunity seemed ideal, but the dilemma of leaving her mother and her neighborhood kept her torn. While she considered the offer, her phone vibrated with a new message. It was Paula, who had been observing Jacob's movements with growing curiosity. "Laura, I need to talk to you urgently. It's about Jacob," the message read. In a moment of desperation, Laura decided to call her friend. Nervous but resolute, Paula revealed her suspicions. Jacob wasn't just a frequent customer, but an influential businessman who'd used his position to orchestrate the help. "Jacob's someone important, Laura. He told me himself in a conversation earlier." The revelation hit Laura hard. She felt betrayed, believing Jacob had pretended to be an ordinary person just to earn her trust. A sense of being used overwhelmed her, and the confidence she'd begun to place in him shattered into pieces. That night, Laura confronted Jacob at the cafe where they'd first met. Her heart pounded as they looked each other in the eye. "Why didn't you tell me who you really are?" Laura asked, her voice laden with hurt and disappointment. "Was all this just a front to help me?" Jacob tried to explain, but Laura no longer wanted to hear his excuses. "I don't want your handouts or your favors. I thought you were someone I could rely on, not someone taking advantage of my situation." Her words struck Jacob like daggers, leaving him speechless. Tension between them rose, and what had been a promising relationship turned into a confrontation loaded with resentment. "I'm sorry, Laura. It was never my intention to make you feel that way," Jacob murmured, his voice shaking with frustration and sorrow. "I'd rather face my problems alone than depend on someone who isn't honest," she replied, turning to leave. As Laura walked away, Jacob remained there, watching his friend distance herself from him. Their argument left deep wounds, and their bond seemed irreparably damaged. Meanwhile, Sean intensified his plan to seize control of the company. Taking advantage of Jacob's distraction, he began spreading negative rumors about his brother's leadership, tampering with reports and sowing doubt among the investors. His unbridled ambition drove him to act without regard for consequences, willing to destroy his own brother to reach his goals. In the office, Logan noticed Sean's increasing maneuvering and prepared for a legal counterattack. He knew he had to move swiftly to protect the company and Jacob, but time was not on their side. That night, as Jacob went over the documents Logan had given him, his phone vibrated with a call from Sean. "We need to talk, now," his brother demanded, in a voice that left no room for negotiation. Feeling the weight of looming conflict and fear, Jacob realized things had escalated far more than he'd ever imagined. The combination of the corporate crisis and his fallout with Laura left him in a vulnerable position, unsure how to confront the challenges closing in on him. Laura's situation deteriorated rapidly. Without a job, and with Carmen needing urgent care, she was forced to accept small temporary jobs that barely covered basic expenses. From handing out flyers to cleaning offices, every day became a struggle to keep her mother alive. The instability of these jobs added another layer of stress to her already overwhelming burden. Nights were especially difficult. After long hours of work, Laura barely had the strength to care for Carmen, who now showed clear signs of exhaustion. Samuel, determined not to let Laura sink further, intensified his support. He offered her money when he could and helped look after her mother, always with a protective and caring attitude. Yet Laura continued to keep some emotional distance, focused on her mother's immediate needs and unable to fully return the affection Samuel offered her. Though she appreciated his help, she felt her heart was too burdened to give Samuel a deeper place in her life. Meanwhile, Jacob faced his own demons. The argument with Laura had left a deep wound, affecting his focus and ability to handle business negotiations. Lacking his usual clarity, he began missing crucial details in contracts and meetings with investors. Sean's internal pressure grew more intense, but Jacob, trapped in personal pain, couldn't give it the attention it deserved. Sensing his brother's distraction, Sean ramped up efforts to discredit Jacob before the board of directors. He began circulating rumors of Jacob's incompetence, manipulating financial reports to show supposed losses that didn't exist. Tension in the office mounted, and investors started doubting Jacob's leadership. Sean was relentless, determined to seize total control of the company at any cost. Paula, for her part, felt growing guilt over the rift between Laura and Jacob. Although she wasn't directly involved, she knew her attempt to reach out to Jacob, hoping to advance her own venture, had indirectly contributed to the tension between them. Resolved to make amends, she looked for ways to reconcile her friends. However, her own plans to open an organic products shop were stalled without Jacob's support, which had initially been a crucial part of her strategy. One afternoon, while Laura was at one of her temporary jobs, she received a call from Samuel. "Laura, I've got something for you," he said, voice full of concern. He had found her a better-paying temporary position at a small local business, a chance to ease some of her financial pressure. Grateful but still somewhat distant, Laura accepted, feeling both relief and weariness from life's constant demands. In Jacob's office, Logan pored over the financial reports and found something alarming. Sean was diverting company funds for personal use. The evidence was overwhelming, and Logan knew he had to move quickly to avert total disaster. He scheduled an urgent meeting with Jacob, who was still struggling to regain his focus. "Jacob, Sean is using the company's resources for his own personal projects. If we don't do something about it, we could lose everything," Logan warned, showing him documents that proved the fraud. Even though Jacob finally realized how serious the situation was, he felt too overwhelmed by his personal troubles to react quickly. The corporate crisis loomed, while his personal relationship with Laura had hit rock bottom, leaving them both vulnerable. That night, as Laura headed home after a grueling day, she received an urgent call from the hospital. Carmen had relapsed and was admitted in an emergency. Panic gripped her, knowing the treatments were now even more costly and urgent. Without stable work, her worry about how to pay for her mother's care grew more intense, pushing her to make increasingly desperate decisions. Meanwhile, in Jacob's office, Sean kept up his merciless assault. He had convinced several board members that Jacob was mismanaging the company, using the fabricated losses to prove his incompetence. Investors quickly lost faith, and the likelihood of a forced sale or external takeover grew more real by the day. Sensing time was running out, Logan began putting together a legal counter-strategy. He gathered all the evidence necessary to expose Sean's schemes and protect Jacob from the baseless accusations. Yet the mounting pressure from internal conspiracies and the corporate crisis was wearing him down. At the same time, Laura, overwhelmed by Carmen's emergency, found herself at a crossroads. The unexpected job offer seemed her only hope to keep her mother afloat, but she was torn by guilt and fear of abandoning her roots. Every day became more difficult as she tried to balance her responsibilities and confront the rising tensions threatening to destroy all she'd worked for. Business at El Encanto had slowed considerably after Laura's departure. However, a new threat loomed over the store. One morning, an official from the Ministry of Finance, Inspector Ramirez, arrived, carrying a folder under his arm and wearing a serious expression. He'd received an anonymous tip suggesting financial irregularities at the shop. Mr. Thomas struggled to maintain composure as the inspector combed through the bookkeeping and recent transactions. Every page Ramirez examined confirmed the suspicions: discrepancies in the inventory, inflated sales, and funds diverted to personal accounts. The evidence was overwhelming. Mr. Thomas, these documents indicate clear manipulation of the store's funds, the inspector stated, pointing to several suspicious entries. Mr. Thomas tried to object, but Ramirez remained firm. "I'm afraid I have no choice but to proceed with a formal investigation." In the midst of the chaos, Laura watched from a safe distance, her heart pounding. She knew she had been wrongly accused, and now the evidence exposed Mr. Thomas's facade. Over time, Inspector Ramirez submitted his report to the authorities, and Mr. Thomas faced charges of fraud and embezzlement. Justice had finally arrived, clearing Laura of any involvement in the store's irregularities. Meanwhile, in Jacob's office, the tension was just as high. Logan had gathered all the evidence needed to confront Sean. During a critical shareholders' meeting, Logan presented a complete dossier detailing Sean's fraudulent schemes. The investors' eyes turned toward Sean, their suspicion growing. "Gentlemen, this is clearly a case of misappropriation and abuse of power by Sean," Logan explained firmly. "These actions not only endanger the integrity of our company, but also our relationship with the Japanese investors." Sean tried to defend himself, but the evidence was irrefutable. Disappointed and angry, the investors demanded clear answers. The pressure was unbearable, and without warning, Sean was stripped of all his positions within the company. His reputation lay in ruins, and the investors withdrew their support, leaving Sean disgraced and isolated. With Sean out of the picture, Jacob took the lead in the business negotiations. His renewed focus and dedication revealed his true abilities as a leader. Strategic meetings and presentations to the investors began improving, recovering the lost confidence. Jacob felt relieved, but also drained by the recent upheavals, aware that much remained to be resolved. In the same neighborhood, Paula had worked tirelessly to uncover the truth behind Jacob's actions. Through discreet conversations and observing his interactions, she discovered he hadn't intended to deceive her, but rather to shield himself from outside interests as he tried to get to know her genuinely. Determined to set things right, Paula approached Laura with the information she'd gathered. "Laura, I need to tell you something important about Jacob," Paula said one afternoon as they met at the local park. "He's not who you think. He really wanted to help you and protect you from certain influences you weren't aware of. He never meant to mislead you." Laura listened closely, her heart still wounded from the sense of betrayal. "How do you know that, Paula?" she asked, her voice gentle yet laden with hurt. Paula took a deep breath before continuing. "I've been watching, and I've talked to some people who know Jacob. He's been doing everything he could to help you, even when he thought you had no idea. He didn't want to reveal too much until he was sure how to proceed." Paula's words began to quell the emotional storm raging inside Laura. Though she still felt hurt, the sincerity in Paula's voice gave her a new perspective. She decided she needed to speak to Jacob again, not with her wounds still open, but with a clearer mind. That night, Laura accepted an invitation to meet Jacob at the same cafe where they'd had their first date. They sat opposite each other, the initial tension replaced by a cautious willingness to hear each other out. "Thank you for coming, Laura," Jacob began, his voice sincere and tinged with regret. "I want you to know everything I did was an attempt to help you in the best way I could. I never wanted you to feel deceived." Laura looked into his eyes, searching for honesty in his gaze. "I understand now, Jacob. I just felt betrayed because I thought it was all an act. But Paula helped me see the truth." Jacob nodded, relieved by Laura's understanding. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. My intention was always to support you, but I got carried away by circumstances and didn't know how to handle it better." They both fell silent for a moment, allowing their emotions to settle. Laura decided to take the next step, aware that they needed to rebuild their trust. "I think we need to start over," Laura said softly. "No more secrets or misunderstandings. I want to trust you, Jacob, but I need time to heal." Jacob nodded, understanding her need for patience. "Of course, Laura. I'm here for you, no matter what you need." Meanwhile, back at the office, Logan had uncovered solid evidence that Sean was funneling company funds elsewhere. Preparing for a legal counterattack, he gathered all the evidence needed to fully expose his former ally's actions. He knew that every minute mattered in protecting the company and Jacob from Sean's scheming. At the hospital, Carmen's health showed signs of improvement, thanks to the urgent treatments that were finally affordable. Though exhausted, Laura felt a ray of hope now that her mother was on the mend. A definitive reunion between Laura and Jacob seemed possible, but Laura remained cautious, prioritizing her mother's health over any personal relationship. Yet the atmosphere had changed, the truth was out, and the barriers between them were beginning to dissolve. Dawn's light filtered through the hospital's large windows, casting a soft glow on the white corridor walls. Jacob walked with purpose toward the room where Carmen lay hospitalized. Clutching a bouquet of flowers in one hand, his heart pounding, he paused at the door for a moment, taking a deep breath before entering. Laura, seated beside her mother's bed, looked up, sensing his presence. A silence filled with expectation settled between them as they regarded each other. Days had passed since their last meeting, and the distance between them still lingered in their gestures. Even so, Jacob approached with a sincerity Laura hadn't seen before. "I'm not here out of pity or to flaunt what I can offer," Jacob said calmly, placing the flowers on the bedside table. "I want you to know my support is genuine. I admired your courage that night in the rain, and I need you to trust me." Laura nodded, not breaking eye contact. She remembered how betrayed she'd once felt. Now she saw in Jacob's face a man who, despite his fears, was willing to be transparent. "Tell me the truth," she asked in a hushed voice. "Why did you hide who you really were?" Jacob pulled up a chair and sat down in front of Laura, trying to find the right words. "I was afraid that if you knew about my financial situation, you'd think I was just approaching you out of charity. I never wanted you to see me as a rich man looking down on you. And honestly, from the moment I met you, I wanted to thank you for your courage. Without you, who knows what might have happened that night?" Laura lowered her gaze, recalling the mugging that first drew them together. She understood that Jacob had never meant to hurt her. She felt his genuine warmth and, for the first time, allowed her own armor to soften. "Thank you for explaining," she murmured, looking back up at him. "And thank you for being here for my mother." From her bed, Carmen watched them with a faint smile. Her face still showed the weariness of illness, but also the peace of seeing her daughter on a clearer path. With Jacob's intervention, Carmen had gained access to a new insurance plan, or special coverage through his company, ensuring she got the care she desperately needed. Laura felt immense relief watching her mother improve. A heavy weight was lifted from her shoulders. Meanwhile, other storylines that had been woven around them began to find resolution. Paula, encouraged by the possibility of a microloan set up via one of Jacob's contacts, found the courage to take the first step in her business venture. Her plan to open an organic product store regained momentum, and for the first time in a while, her enthusiasm shone openly. As for Samuel, he finally understood that Laura's feelings did not match his own. Even so, he said goodbye with a sincere hug, wishing her happiness. He decided to seek a new direction for his life, maybe move to another neighborhood or pursue his true calling, away from the shadow of an unrequited love. Jacob, for his part, suggested that Laura join one of the partner companies he worked with. With little fanfare, he invited her to develop her skills there while preparing to resume her studies if she wished. For Laura, it was a professional leap and a chance to grow away from the hostile environment she'd known at El Encanto. With Mr. Thomas facing legal consequences and removed from the store, El Encanto reorganized under new management. It was the end of an era for Laura, who left behind the hardships of her days as an exploited cashier. Yet she looked back fondly on the friendships she had formed there, especially with Paula. A few weeks later, with Carmen recovering well at home, Laura and Jacob decided to take a stroll down the same street where they had first met in the pouring rain. The pavement, now lit by the mid-afternoon sun, no longer evoked violence or fear, but rather a memory transformed into something deeper. "Remember?" Jacob asked, pointing to the exact spot of the mugging. "I never thought something so violent would end up bringing us together." Laura laughed, grateful that the painful past had given way to a hopeful future. "Life surprises us in the most unexpected ways," she replied, taking Jacob's hand. Their eyes met, full of the promise of a shared path ahead. In a spontaneous gesture, Jacob drew her close and held her tightly. A gentle kiss sealed the moment, confirming that, despite the secrets and hardships, sincerity and love had triumphed. Off in the distance, the everyday sounds of the neighborhood drifted around them. People's chatter, traffic noise, a street vendor calling out his wares. But for Laura and Jacob, this instant felt timeless, like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, full of promise. And so, with a tender embrace and a hopeful kiss, ended the story of a humble young woman who, through an act of courage and solidarity, found a new start alongside someone who, beyond material wealth, recognized the nobility and worth she carried in her heart. Laura and Jacob's story reminds us that kindness and courage can blossom in the most unexpected places. She embodied the boldness of someone who defends what they love without expecting anything in return. He, despite having all the material advantages, discovered something more valuable in Laura than money: authenticity and the strength that emerges from daily struggles. Over the course of the plot, they both learned that trust is built on honesty and sincere actions, and that even the deepest divides can be bridged when people open themselves to understanding each other's stories. Appearances, social pressures, and external interests all tried to keep them apart, but truth and love ultimately prevailed. Their genuine reconciliation shows the importance of open communication. When two people share their fears and desires, empathy and understanding are born. It's also a story that teaches us that solidarity and compassion are never just handouts, but the very essence of our humanity. Helping someone in need, or risking oneself for someone you value, is a way to forge lasting, sincere bonds. Finally, the growth of the other characters, Paula realizing her dream of starting a business, Samuel's self-reflection, and El Encanto's reorganization after Mr. Thomas's downfall, reveals that every obstacle, however tough, can open the door to a new beginning. Thus, the story invites us to believe that even in the darkest times, there is hope in honesty, generosity, and the ability to forgive. When these values prevail, no difference can stand in the way of true love and a brighter future. And that's the end of our story today. Thank you for following along to the end. If you enjoyed this tale, give it a like and subscribe for more content. We'll see you soon with more stories that bring us together.